Hey Maria, Klawe, leader of CEO of Math for America. It'd be great if you could start by giving us a brief introduction of yourself.
Well, my name's Maria Klawe, and I've been president at Math for America for now not quite 2 years. And before that, I was the president of Harvey Med College in Claremont in Southern California for 17 years. And before that, I was the Dean of Engineering at Princeton. Before that, the Dean of Science at the University of British Columbia. I'm a mathematician and computer scientist. I'm very passionate about making it possible for people who are underrepresented in STEM careers, like women in computer science, for example, or people of color in just about every STEM area, and making it possible for them to thrive in STEM fields.
And what does math mean to you? Like, how would you define math?
Oh, it's so interesting because it's a whole bunch of different things. So I've always loved math. And one of my great joys right now is teaching my 6-year-old grandson about math. And so it's some combination of patterns, of beauty, of puzzles, of just different ways to see the world. And right now, I got sent a book about topology, but it's like topology for 6-year-olds from the American Math Society. And I'm getting ready to introduce it to my grandson, who's going to spend the weekend with us. And it asks you, if you have any set of points in space, can you always find a line that connects them in the order that they're given to you? And the answer is yes. But I'm busy trying to figure out a proof that will be understandable to my grandson. So it's this, it's this sort of, I think it's just, so first of all, there's many, many different kinds of math, and they're, they allow you, they give you different frameworks, different lenses to look at the world. And I just love the fact that there's so many different kinds of math and so many different ways that you can use it to better understand what's happening, whether it's what's happening in the stock market or whether it's what's happening in a pattern that you see. So yes, I'm very passionate about math.
What got you into it? Was there one day where, there was a aha moment, or did you always find you were good at it?
I think I always liked math, and I always liked art and music. And I remember having a conversation with one of my dad's friends when I was 12. And this person, so my dad was a cartographer, and this was some well-known scientist. And he said, "I heard that you like math." And I said, "Yes, I like math a lot." And he said, "And I heard you like art too." And I said, "Yes, I do like art a lot." And he said, "Well, you're going to have to pick one or the other. You can't be really good at both." And I said, "I'm going to be like Leonardo da Vinci. I'm going to be really good at both." And here I am, I'm 74 years old. And so, it's 62 years since I had this conversation, and I'm still doing math and art.
Nice, nice. I suppose sometimes it is always like a preconception that you either pick the arts or you pick the sciences and math. So it's good that you've done both. Yeah, moving on from that, like preconceptions about math. That seems like a preconception that you can't be good at both art and math. Do you think there are any other preconceptions about maths or
Well, I think partly because of my age, at the time I was growing up, um, the people in the math department at the university I went to as an undergraduate would say to me, "Maria, you are so talented in so many different areas. Why are you choosing math, given that there are no great women mathematicians?" And they weren't telling me I wasn't good at math. What they were saying was there's a bias against being female in math. And I think that was really true. But of course, I'm extraordinarily stubborn. So it made me more likely to stay in math. And it just made me very, very passionate about wanting to attract more women into math. And these days, so when I got my PhD in 1977, about 9% of the PhDs were going to women in math. This is basically measured across North America. But the numbers are not better in Europe. And by now, it's like 30%. So it's gone up quite a lot. And if you look at some areas of statistics, like biostatistics, it would be about 50%.
So it seems that definitely like from then and throughout, there's been a sort of ideal mathematician, and people see that, and people can base their career decisions on that. And I get that. I think a lot of people as well would be like, "Oh, math." I always hear the phrase "math isn't for me." They always think it's like for a certain person. Like, there's a lot of things where anyone can do, like anyone can work out and get healthy, but I think most people do think that anyone can't do maths. Like, would you agree with this, or do you think this is something
No, no,
that's
no.
changing as
Everyone
well?
can do math.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
thought
one
so.
of those things that, so I happen to be very uncoordinated, physically uncoordinated. I mean, not in fine skills, motor skills, because I'm a very serious watercolor artist. I paint all the time and I do, portraits and as well as other stuff, but in larger physical coordination. And one of the things I decided to do partly is because I want to make the point that it's not how easy something is for you, it's how hard you work at it and whether you persevere. And of course math has always been easy for me, but the point I want to make to people who think they can't do math is, if I can learn to do things that require a lot of physical coordination, then you can learn to do math. It's just perseverance. And so I learned to juggle, and eventually it took me 10 years, but I learned to juggle 4 balls, which requires a lot more coordination than 3 balls. I learned to ride a skateboard when I was the president at Harvey Mudd, because a lot of students ride skateboards. And it took me like 2 months to get to where most students would be after half a day. But the thing about math is that so often people, if you don't learn it quickly, people say, I'm just not good at math. And the reality is that there are great mathematicians who were slow at learning math. So it really, your speed of learning is not connected with depth or creativity or ability to solve problems. It's just speed of learning. And so I think one of the really important things about math is just to change that perception that it's something you're good at or not, because that's just not true. Now, what's very interesting is I was giving a talk in China. This is probably just before the pandemic, and I was talking to Chinese students. In China, everybody knows that math is about hard work. It's not something you're born to be good at. It's something you work hard at, because being good at math is important. So,
Yeah, that's so interesting that there's a cultural element to it as well. Because I've only got my Western basis to go from, and I've always known it here. Like at school, you had the kid who was good at math, and everyone else then was like, "Oh, I don't get math. He does. He's the best, and therefore I'm not good." But how do you think we can change that perception, getting people to see it? Because some people may pick up driving really fast, and some people don't pick up driving. But we all learn to drive. But like with math, we just give up quick. How do you think we can change that perceptions?
I think it's one of these things that um, where we need to talk about it more. So, one of the things that's happening next year in 2026, the International Congress of Mathematicians is meeting in Philadelphia towards the end of July. This is the first time that the International Congress of Mathematics will be meeting in the United States since 1986. So 40 years later. And one of the things that the various math societies are doing in the United States is we're celebrating a year of math. And one of the huge goals for this is, can we change the perception so that everybody realizes that math is for everybody? It's not this club where some people are in it and some people are not. And I, I think so. One of the things I'm thinking about, partly as being the president of Math for America, is, can we have some of our teachers who are particularly good at convincing students that math is for them, all of their students? Can we have them come up with ideas so that others could help? Others who appreciate math could help others gain the confidence that that there is something there for them, that there are things they can understand and appreciate.
And moving on not fully moving on, but similar topic, but with diversity and like, what do you think the main issues are with diversity in maths? Is it
I think one of the problems in our culture is that because there's sort of this belief that either you have the gene that makes you good at math or you don't. And so it's very easy for someone, uh, and it can happen pretty early in your life. I mean, it could happen when you're 6 years old. It could happen when you're 10 years old or 15 years old. It could happen when you're in first year university. But somebody tells you, who has influence, so most likely a teacher or a professor, tells you you're just not good at math. And you accept that, and it closes that door. Now, because we have all kinds of cultural beliefs, it's more likely that if you are Black or brown and not Asian, that you'll get told that you're not good at math. And there's a student at Harvey Mudd who ended up majoring in math and is doing his PhD in applied mathematics at the moment. And he was told by a teacher when he was in 11th grade that he wasn't all that good at math. And he once told me when he was, I think, in his third year at Mudd, that the only reason that he discovered that he was good at math was he came to Mudd and they made him believe it. And so I think one of the problems is that because it's so easy for someone to close that door, and if you're part, most people think Asians are good at math. Why are Asians good at math? Well, they're good at math because their culture tells them it's important to be good at math and that it's something anyone could be good at if you just work hard. But our culture doesn't have that. It has, you're good at math if you were just born that way. So, the diversity issue is really about spreading the word that everyone, what I always say is the important part is, there are lots of things that are difficult to learn. But the important part is, one, to ask for help and take help, and two, to persevere and believe that if you continue to do those things, you will succeed. And people do succeed.
Yeah, and that was clearly evidenced by your time at Harvey Mudd, like seeing significant increases in the number of women grads in computer science and maths, and
and engineering and physics, all of the areas.
Yeah. I'd like to know more how you did that. Obviously, instilling beliefs one thing. I imagine there was a lot of other work as well that went on.
I think so. First of all, the reason I actually chose to go be president at Mudd, and Princeton was shocked when I did that because they were sort of saying, you're supposed to go be president at the University of Michigan or Yale or something, a major research university. And I said, no, I'm going to Mudd because I believe in changing the culture of STEM so it embraces everyone. And to do that, you have to be willing to change how you teach, both the curriculum you're using and the pedagogy that you're using. And I said, I think Mudd is a place that can do that because they have a tradition of innovation in pedagogy and curriculum. And so, what really happened there was it started in the computer science department that they explored different ways of teaching the introductory course that would stop people being freaked out by the fact that there were some students who were arriving at Mudd having done several courses in high school, and some people arriving having never taken any courses in high school in computer science. And it will not surprise you that most of the people who had taken several courses were male and white or Asian. And, in most cases, it's because they had a parent or they had a teacher who was, exposed them to this and they were interested and they did well. And initially, when they started at Mudd, they were all in the same section of the introductory course. And of course, if you have people of color and women who are in that course and they see that there's a group of students who know all the answers to everything and they're white or Asian and male, you just take it for granted that this is not for you. And so the department changed to offer three first possible courses: a course for people who had never written a line of code, a course for people who had taken, say, AP computer science in high school, and a course for people who had way too much experience to be in an introductory course at all. And then they also made sure that, because one of the things we know is that for women and people of color, it's often true that what interests them is how you can use mathematics or computer science to solve a real world problem rather than just for its own theoretical interest. And so they made sure that a lot of the homework was one, collaborative, so you were not just doing it by yourself, and two, applied whatever you were learning to solving real world problems like the spread of a disease or, that kind of thing. And then the other thing we knew was that if we could give students a chance to do, a summer internship in industry where they could see that what they were learning again was useful in solving real world problems, they'd be more likely to decide they were going to major in that area. And so we were very fortunate in that we were able to persuade Microsoft, Facebook, Intel, and Google to offer early internships for students. So as early as after their first year in college. And that really helped the students understand that this was something useful. And so we went, when I arrived, I think about 10 to 15% of the majors in computer science were female. Within about 4 years, it was up around 40%. And within another few years, it was at 50%. And once computer science, so computer science had the lowest participation by women in the majors at MUD when I arrived. Both physics and engineering were over 20% female. Once it happened in computer science, it started to happen in engineering, and physics as well. And so by the time I left, we were 50% in every major. We also were able to, MUD was very largely white and Asian as well as male in the student body when I arrived. And we were able to change that so it became so it was 50% female across the college, but also one of the racially most diverse colleges in the country. And we're able to see that students from different races went into all of the majors. And so this is one of these things that when you are able to communicate that subjects are something everyone could be good at, and if you provide the support that's needed so that when somebody needs help, they can get help, it happens.
I think it's really interesting as well. You touched on the application, like doing internships. If you're actually applying maths to a job, you'll be more likely to do it. I think I can say that from experience. It's like when you're at school, you do maths and you think, when am I ever going to need this? And use it in the real world. And you're like, wow, maths is amazing. So I'd be interested in understanding what your thoughts are and how, not just at a university level, but even from a younger level, how we can get people to appreciate the application of maths.
Well, so this is, something that we're working on. And I think the answer is different for different people. So if you happen to really like sports, there's a lot of math in sports that I think most non-math people don't really realize. If you happen to really like art, there are lots of ways that you can think about math from an art perspective. If you happen to like music, again, there are lots of ways you can think about that. I think one of the realities is that I think most people like puzzles. Like they don't think about puzzles as being math. And yet virtually every puzzle has some component of mathematics that makes it interesting and challenging. And so I think the strategy has to be to find lots and lots of different ways where you can allow people who didn't realize that something they already liked had a lot of math in it, can make that connection.
And with all the constraints on teachers and time and like thinking of schools and when you learn, it tends to be you've got one curriculum, you learn it, and that's that. It's not really adapted. How do you think we can, enable children to understand like the mathematics, and if they're a football fan, mathematics and football, if they're like art, mathematics and art, how do we think we can how do you think that could be best done?
Yeah, so there are a number of curricula that really try to make those connections across lots of different things. So one of the ones that has been highly rated by various organizations that review curriculum like Ed Reports is illustrative math. And the whole idea is that as many of the ideas as possible, all of the ideas in reality, get connected with some application. Now, I think one of the problems we have, I would say more in the US than some other places, is that in certain school districts, there will be a lot of students who, miss picking something up when they're in third, fourth, fifth, sixth grades. And then they end up in, high school or junior high school, and they're introduced to something and they don't have the sort of fundamental understanding of sort of the basic elements that are needed for this. And so, I think one of the things that there's a lot of work going into right now is how do you make those connections? How do you help students build up understanding, let's say when they're 12 or 13 or 14, when the thing they're missing is something from when they were 9. There is a lot of work going into it, and it's particularly because of what happened during the pandemic, particularly because, particularly in the US, we closed schools for over a year. There's a lot of missing pieces there. And so I think one of the most important things for us to think about is how teachers and curriculum can help students find those missing pieces and fit them back into the puzzle so that they can make sense of what they're learning now, 4 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later.
And moving on to Math for America, so I'm aware it was founded by the great mathematician Jim Simmons to help teachers be attracted to teaching rather than be to opportunities elsewhere. I'd be interested in hearing if you could give us, for myself and for the audience, a bit more of a summary about Math for America and how everything's
Yeah,
going
I'd
right
love
now.
to do that. So Jim Simons, who is the founder of Math for America, he passed away about a year and 3 months ago in May of 2024. And he was a very gifted mathematician, though not the fastest mathematician. I mean, he made a thing of the fact that he wasn't as fast as other mathematicians, and he would say, "I'm not going to work on a problem lots of people are already working on because they're going to be faster than me at solving it. I'm going to work on something that people aren't working on." But in any case, he fairly early in his career, he started the first quantitative hedge fund and became a billionaire. And about 20 years ago, he decided that he would love to find a way. So his city was New York City, and he wanted to find a way that he could help New York City have really great math and science teachers and have them stay. And a number of things were tried initially, but the approach that turned out to be particularly successful was to recruit teachers into 4-year fellowships who were already excellent teachers. And then in that 4-year fellowship, where they would receive $15,000 per year on top of their regular salary, to have them offer professional development to each other and offer them all professional development by experts. And the idea was, one, the extra funding will make the salaries for a public school teacher that much more attractive, which they certainly do. But the other one is that through this professional development that they're involved in, they're going to develop a lot of other skills, and they're going to be able to use those skills within their own school, within their community, within the greater Math for America community. And it has been very successful in terms of keeping teachers in the profession. You can get more, you can have up to 5 of these fellowships in a row, so 20 years worth. We do have you. If you become an assistant principal or the principal of a high school, you can't continue to be a fellow. So we lose some of the people who stay in the profession, but they enter leadership roles within their schools. But the amazing part of this is that the community that's been built of roughly 1,000 teachers, first of all, they stay and they absolutely love it. I mean, and you will hear them say things like, Math for America changed my life. And a lot of it is that what we were basically saying is, we respect you, we value you. And it just gives them a sense of both self-worth, but also that they can have impact within the greater teacher community. And so it's, I think it's a pretty amazing story that he did this. We continue to be funded by the Simons Foundation. So he and his wife, Marilyn, and Marilyn is still with us, created this fairly early on in their careers. They created this foundation, and it has a huge impact in terms of supporting research as well as education in a broad area of science and math. But I think that just within New York City, the impact on the teachers is phenomenal.
And I know you mentioned the great community and the stipends, but how else do talent's a big thing in maths. The great talented mathematicians have got vast amount of opportunities at hedge funds and other things. How do you really solve that issue of attracting talent?
Yeah. So I think for many mathematicians, so at least from my perspective, one of the most compelling things you can do with your life is to encourage others. And so I think for many teachers, the thing that just makes them love the work they do is the fact that on a day-to-day basis, they're changing the trajectories of the students they work with. And I mean, it's certainly true that you can earn a lot more money by going to a hedge fund or going to work for a tech company. But I think the fact that the combination of the joy of actually changing people's lives and the fact that you're part of a community that values that makes a huge difference.
And what's the most challenging things about running Maths for America?
I think, well, I'll just talk about the challenge I have faced, which is really something about post pandemic in the US that uh, I think one of the things that have affected many, many organizations, and Math for America is a pretty small organization, has about 25 staff members and 1,000 teachers. But the actual people who run it are about 25 people. And one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that people got used to working from home. And the transact back to actually coming into the office on a regular basis has been very challenging for a lot of organizations. So I would say when I started working in this role, one of the things I was really surprised by was that the staff were really not that happy. And this was my first time taking on an organization where that was the truth. One of the things I routinely do when I start a new position is I try to, in an organization that has only 25 people, I met one-on-one with every single person and asked them the standard kinds of questions like, how long have you been here for? What do you do? What do you love about it? What would you change if you had a magic wand? Et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the most important question is, what would you change if you had a magic wand? Because it enables them to suggest something that could be better without making them feel uncomfortable about it. And I heard from lots of people that they didn't feel that their voices were heard and they didn't feel trusted. And, I think so we're almost 2 years from that point. And the thing I can tell you is people are genuinely happy and feel trusted and feel heard. And we did put a lot of work into it. And, culture is a very important part of an organization. And it's probably one of the most difficult things to change. So my CIO at Harvey Mudd used to say, culture eats strategy for lunch every day. But we have put a lot of effort into it, and it's been successful. I think that was the first big challenge. The second one I would say is that we're very lucky that our organization is funded by the Simons Foundation. But one of the things you have to think about is, will the Simons Foundation always support Math for America? Not necessarily. I'm sure it will for the immediate future. But one of the things you have to think about is, how do you support it? How do you try to make sure that it's going to be around forever? And so one of the things that we've been doing is, one, recruiting people to our board who are really passionate about Math for America. And then the second thing is we've started a new project called the MFA STEM Futures Cohort Project, where we're We've raised some money from other organizations than the Simons Foundation. Simons Foundation is also contributing to it. It's matching everything we've raised from other places. But and the idea is working at schools where we have MFA teachers and where we're going to work directly with students starting in ninth grade to try to interest them in pursuing STEM majors once they go to college, particularly math and computer science. And we're focused on schools that almost entirely serve students from low-income backgrounds, because if you look at the people who don't go into STEM careers, I mentioned women, I mentioned people of color, but also people from low-income backgrounds tend to be underrepresented. And so our goal is to see if we can significantly change that trajectory. And so it's exciting because it's doing something we haven't done before. It means we're working with the teachers in the school, but we're also working directly with the students in the school. And we'll see what happens. And we're starting with just 2 schools. But the goal is that if we can prove that that actually works, then we'll scale up to a larger number of schools in 4 or 5 years.
And moving on, so obviously working at the Math for America and as a board member of Microsoft, you've had the opportunity to work with people like Jim Simons and Bill Gates. Like, how is that?
You know, I think one of the things that's true about, for example, both Jim Simons and Bill Gates, major philanthropists, people who have a passion for changing the world. I would say also people with a larger than life personality. Um, I'm good friends with Marilyn Simons, and one of the things Marilyn will say is that when Jim was alive, if she was at some event and somebody would come up and talk to her about something, and then Jim would come over and he would completely take over the conversation. Uh, and I think, I think I feel very privileged to have I've known Jim for a very long time. I mean, long before I came to, for more than 20 years. So long before I joined the board of Math for America. And I've known, Bill Gates not as well, but also for a long time. And I think in both cases, and this is true for a lot of people who've had very successful careers and have had a lot of impact in the world, they have their ideas and they think, they are very convinced that they're right about their ideas. And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not right. And I think one of the things you just have to be prepared for is that it's okay to disagree with them at times.
And I imagine with them being such rational people, their minds would be easier to change, or am I mistaken in that assumption?
I think this is one of these things that you're probably able to have discussions about some things that are easier to decide on the basis of facts, but not about everything. Because, two people can look at the same set of facts and come out to a different conclusion about what is the cause of what we're looking at. For example, I happen to believe that climate change is happening. Right now we have an administration that doesn't believe that climate change is happening. It's certainly one of these things. There's facts that can cause you to argue in either direction. Yeah.
And moving on to the future, so what most excites you about the future, whether it be projects or technology? I'm curious to know what does.
I'll just say I'm really excited about the year of math. I'm excited about the fact that I think for the first time in the US that I can remember, we're really having this conversation about how do we make math more accessible to more people? How do we make it easier for somebody to embrace mathematics? And I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, totally agree. It's definitely great if we can keep moving towards that direction and make it more accessible and really get the best out of people. And last question, I always like to ask this at the end. Do you have a favorite? It can be a favorite book, a guiding principle, or a best piece of advice, or anything that you swear by.
Oh, I have a best piece of advice. Yeah, I'm someone who fights very hard for the things they believe in. And one of the things I am gradually learning, and as I mentioned, I'm 74, so you'd think I would have learned this before, but I'm becoming more aware of that there are often ways that you can solve a problem or you can change something, not by necessarily hitting the obstacle with a battering ram with full force. Sometimes you can just move to the side and move forward. So it's this idea that when you're trying to change the world, be prepared for the idea that there might be a different strategy that's more effective than the one you've been trying. And the second piece of advice I'll give, there's something called first wave, second wave, which is if you come to an organization, you're the first person to be trying to get something to change. It's really hard. If somebody has already done that, you can come and it's way easier to get that thing to change because that person has already, in some sense, a lot of the resistance to that idea has focused on the first person. And so when you come along as a different person and you're doing this, they're much more willing to listen. So, for all kinds of reasons, one of the things I really believe about changing the world is it's very important to link networks that aren't already interconnected. Because if you're an outside voice talking about something, people will hear you more easily. If you're the second person pushing in a direction, people will support you more easily. I mean, there's just so many reasons why it's often easier for when you've been working really hard on trying to make something happen, getting help from somebody else will make it much easier for it to happen.
Yeah, that's great, and that's really interesting because I've heard a lot of like pieces of advice and that sort of thing, and some are quite similar, but it's quite different. And it's almost as like the first person's a sacrificial lamb going to like
Yes.
soften up your opponent, and then you go in and learn from what they've done. But yeah,
I've had the good fortune of being the second wave and the misfortune of being the first wave many times in my life, and it's really very interesting how different it is.
but Maria Klawe, President of Math for America, thanks ever so much for your time. It's a really pleasure to speak about such interesting things that you're passionate about, like math and changing the world, and I really admire what you do. And thanks ever so much for your time.
Well, I enjoyed talking with you a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.